Stocks and crypto plummet as macro uncertainty continues to weigh on investors. We cover all this right now in the Collective Shift weekly recap, actionable insights, and a breakdown into the crypto market, all in under 30 minutes. More blood in the markets this week, Simon. Similar in a way to where we picked off with our last episode. So not much has changed in a way, but a lot of the sentiment has even gotten a lot more worse. So I'm keen to sort of discuss where we are and maybe where we're going. So yeah, still pretty rough out there. Hey.
Very rough. It seems every week the price is going down. So obviously sentiment can keep getting worse because price keeps going down. It's funny how sentiment is so related to price action. I think everyone is, trying to catch a bottom, aren't they? It's this, falling knife kind of thing where everyone's trying to buy the dip, but the dip keeps dipping. And I think that's where we are. And I think it's, at my personal opinion right now, it's a bit of a fool's game to be playing that game because we've got, probably a long time for this recovery to occur. So we've got to wait till the bottom gets set in. Sure, you might not buy the exact bottom, but that's the risk you play. I think sentiment's bad. And so just hang around until sentiments start to change, really.
Yeah, that's it there. I think just to put in some context of how bad things have been, really, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, but just as a reminder, we are down about nearly 10% for Bitcoin the past 7 days. Ethereum down 13% below $2,000. Solana and XRP both down about 15% on the week for at the time of recording, and that ends for Bitcoin around 110,000 more or less not too long ago. And for stocks, we've seen really a continuation of around a 3-week sort of market sell-off, and that particularly intensified at the time recording yesterday. So on Monday US time, we saw some of the worst selling off in US stock markets in recent memory, certainly since Trump took office. And even the likes of Tesla, even Robinhood is down very badly. Even Coinbase as well, looking at that earlier. Tesla now down more than 50% since December 17. Certainly altcoins in the crypto space, even Bitcoin, taking a big hit, and many of the major stocks there in the US. So you might be wondering, yes, I know, Matt and Simon, you don't have to remind me, prices are down. I think what we will really try to do here, Simon, is maybe just explain, put some context about why do prices just keep falling week after week?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the basic thing is that if stock market's going down, then to think that crypto is going to do the opposite is, a little bit silly. Obviously, there's a lot of global macro pressures that are pushing this price down. And, most people are pointing the finger at Trump and his tariffs. So we're not going to see that easing until maybe Trump's tariffs and his trade war starts to settle down a bit. I think everyone's still uncertain about how long and how far that goes. But if we zoom out and just simply look at Bitcoin, everyone's heard before that, Bitcoin has 30% pullbacks in a bull market. Well, Bitcoin where it's at now is pretty much at a 30% pullback. So everyone should be like, oh, well, I was expecting this because as the price was going up, I was expecting 30% pullbacks. Doesn't make it easy to go through it. And what certainly doesn't make it easy is when other altcoins are being absolutely obliterated way more than 30%. Even the likes of Solana well over 50% down now. So that's what I guess is slightly different about this cycle is that typically when Bitcoin had 30% pullbacks, a lot of those altcoins would have 40, 50% pullbacks. But right now we're seeing some significant amount of alts having, 80, 90% pullbacks, which is a bear market for an alt. Let's face it, if they're doing that much, that's not a good sign for an altcoin. Maybe what it's all really pointing towards is that when there is fear in the market, and that's a global macro kind of fear in general, then really people look to more safety, to look to more fundamentals. It's probably why Bitcoin is faring better. But, even the safety of a stock like Tesla is getting, slammed at the moment. So there's no safe space to really ride out this current turmoil. But I think Trump has got a plan here, and I think that he wouldn't just want the stock market to crash. That is not his game at all. I think he's got a bigger plan going on here, and I think, in my mind, he's got the Fed put at play at any given time where he knows that he can force the Fed to drop rates. He can force the Fed to pivot from quantitative tightening to quantitative easing, and he can also, release treasury money. So he's got fiscal policy. So he's got those things in his back pocket. He knows that they are there. And so I think right now his trade wars is trying to obviously come to some kind of terms, which is beyond me to understand of what he's trying to do with the trade wars and, trying to attack, I guess, his major trading partners. But he's got the Fed put and the Treasury fiscal put in his back pocket, and he knows he can turn those on, and that makes assets go higher. So I think that's an interesting play that he has, and it's something really only the US have, being the world reserve currency, that they can decimate, I guess, assets like that, knowing full well that they can turn the tap back on and turn this around. And that's what I'm looking for to a degree, to see when we might have a bottom, is when those kind of policies start to come into play, when those fiscal policies and when those central bank policies might start pivoting. That's when we might finally see a bottom, or more likely a uptick in the market.
Yeah, well said. I even view it as even the timing, if Trump is planning to do things that are unfavorable and not in the interest of investors, really, and asset prices, will really suffer because of some of his policies, I think it's best for Trump to do that, sooner rather than later. So, they're in this window now where, whether it's true or not, they can still blame things on the Biden administration. They've just sort of come into this administration with the flow-on effects. Whereas, for Trump to do like some of this very anti-market sort of policies like he's doing now, if he was to do that in his second or third year, there'd be no one else to blame but him. So, look, this is the time, if there ever is, for Trump to be short-term, doing things that he knows stock investors and crypto investors won't really be favorable of, and that's certainly things like tariffs and also, I think people are forgetting also uncertainty in terms of sources of uncertainty. Yes, tariffs is by far the biggest one, and we've got April 2nd there as a date Trump continues to reference in terms of expecting more retaliatory tariffs. On April 1st, there is a report coming in to his office. So the day after that, it's widely expected there'll be a lot more tariffs. But I think people are forgetting that there's also other sources of uncertainty, particularly, with the fiscal side of things that you said, Simon, with Elon Musk, and the uncertainty around how much the Doge is going to be cutting, fiscal spending, particularly given the public sector has been such a driver of economic growth in many developed countries. I know here in Australia and even in the US for sure. And you've also got uncertainty about the tax cuts. So the other side of it. So when is Trump all of a sudden going to start really pushing for the tax cuts and really spruiking those and promoting those? There's also uncertainty surrounding what happens with all the savings that the US get. I know Trump and Elon Musk have sort of floated the idea of distributing some of those savings onto I suppose, stimulus checks in a way, whether it's 10% or 20% of the savings going to US citizens. Again, that's an idea, and that is something that has no detail yet. And it's something that the market knows is a possibility, but there is so much uncertainty surrounding it. So when you combine that with, I guess, the state of the world and tariffs, and other areas of uncertainty surrounding the central bank and all of that, it can explain why, stocks which have undoubtedly had a very, very nice period for a number of years now. You can see why they're selling off of all-time highs.
Yeah, it's very much so you're emphasising there a carrot and a stick approach there. So he's currently hitting the stick over everyone with asset prices going down, but there's a carrot. Hey, I might give you some tax breaks. I might give you just some free money. Great incentives there. I mean, I think when it comes to Trump, he's obviously very polarizing. People love him or hate him, basically. There's no in between. I try to be a little bit more impartial to it, but I think he's a very smart man and he's got a plan. And he's been given a mandate because he got voted in so strongly that he's got a mandate, and I think he's clearly pushing that agenda right now. And I think that's kind of where we're at. We're playing in Trump's game right now. He has basically the control of the entire US government, and so he's got control of the world reserve currency, and he's going to leverage that to the best of his ability to help the US people in the way that he sees fit, which I think is such a big advantage, with the knowledge that he does have the Federal Reserve to print money when he needs to, the fiscal policy to print money when he needs to, creating treasuries and just going out and spending money. He's got that in his back pocket. And so I think right now he's doing what needs to be done, or his version of what needs to be done, knowing full well that to make the Americans happy in the long run is they need the asset prices going up and they can't default on all their debt and all those kind of lovely central bank things that go around and the budget deficits and all that. But at the end of the day, he's still going to have to come back around to inflating asset prices by printing money in some way, shape or form. But right now he's doing what he's doing. So hopefully he's got a good plan. Hopefully it gets there faster than we all kind of fear.
Yeah.
And this takes time. This doesn't happen week by week, but prices seem to keep going down week by week, which is why everyone's so fearful.
Yeah, certainly. So I think in terms of like, how far can we keep going? I think everyone's starting to wonder, what are some potential catalysts or signs that we're bottoming out and the momentum, is starting to shift. I think, one absolute, arguably the biggest, factor there is people just wanting some acknowledgement from Trump himself. Like, what would be the most powerful factor there of Trump himself, like acknowledging that the crash sort of isn't great, and that he's wanting, the stock market performance to correct, which, so far, to emphasize, has not happened at all. Trump, last week was very just, sort of, this is just going through the motions of a normal sell-off. He didn't really acknowledge the sell-off at all. I think when questioned about it, he said he hadn't really been monitoring the stock market, and he blamed it on globalists. Again, sort of trying to put an enemy that isn't him. And then even just minutes before we started recording, Simon, this has come through where I think this is the first acknowledgement by the White House answering to the public about, the stock market crashes. And again, there's it's all about just reading this in real time, but it's more so just telling investors out there that they're not really a priority, really is the summary, and they've got more important things that they're focusing on in the short term, which is consistent with what their actions have been. So again, what I'm looking for and something that would make me confident from an investing lens in the short term would be, Trump saying, okay, enough's enough. So if stocks were to crash even further, that's when you'd likely see some more action being taken. But for now, looks like the US Trump is sort of saying, we have to take some short-term pain, which again is consistent with what he's been saying this whole time.
Yeah, and when you put into numbers as well, the S&P 500 is only down like 10% from its all-time high. And so while that is not great, that's not super painful for the stock market. They go through these at times. What is super painful when they step in? I don't know, maybe 15%, definitely 20%, I would have thought. And so that's where there's still room for this price action to go still, where the Federal Reserve and Trump won't step in to try and turn the ship around. So I think there's still some ability for them to bleed out these markets while they're still doing their trade wars and things like that before they want to do anything about it. And I think one thing that in that post you're saying there is that crypto and Bitcoin are not their priority. And I totally agree with that. Like, I mean, markets in general are their priority, but like their sole focus is not trying to make Bitcoin go up in price. It's just simply not. It's not as big of a factor for the Trump administration. He's got so many other things going on. And I guess, that kind of brings us to what we'll next want to talk about, which was the lovely White House Crypto Summit, which, put bluntly, was a bit of a nothing burger, wasn't it really? What really happened out of that, Matt?
Yeah, the actual summit itself, really didn't deliver too much in terms of price-sensitive news, because I think just hours before, Trump actually signed an executive order. Well, we might talk about this a bit more in terms of he's sort of front-run his own working group in a way. Unless they've come back to him super quickly, which I highly doubt. Something's gone on behind closed doors where, Trump, well, this will go down as a famous date in Bitcoin's history, signed an executive order to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And, the main takeaway, as we've talked about, probably the last, ever since Trump got voted in, or actually even since his speech at Bitcoin 2024, we've talked about, what could this actually mean in terms of a reserve. So that was about July last year, and it came out, the most likely sort of outcome. I think we'd always been saying if Trump was to establish a Bitcoin reserve, it would almost certainly be them just, changing, just the possession of their Bitcoin that they currently have, just sort of putting that into a reserve and almost renaming what that amount of Bitcoin represents. So again, for those unaware, it's another agency sort of under the US government, sort of is in control and historically has been in control of roughly 200,000 Bitcoin. And it has always been the intention of that agency to sell and auction off the Bitcoin to the public. And that's what they had been doing under the Biden administration, very slowly. And now Trump has sort of come out last week, this executive order saying, okay, we're going to promise, not to sell this Bitcoin and it's going to become a stockpile. So again, the most likely outcome happened, and that's why we did see an aggressive sell-off just minutes after that news came out, and that again was before the summit, just a few hours before the summit. We saw a heavy selling off, and really why? Because it sort of extinguished that hope that there would be altcoins or something that the government would be accumulating. So I think maybe Simon, just explain what the deal is with altcoins. I think they have a stockpile. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, this kind of came about because like a week before, Trump tweeted out about XRP, Sol, and Cardano making up part of the crypto reserve. And so if we can remember, that was that flash in the pants, 25% up for Solana, and Cardano went up like 50%. And then the next day they dropped straight back down, lost it all based off a tweet from Trump. So that was hinting at these other cryptocurrencies being part of the reserve. And that just hasn't panned out to be the case. It's more of these are crypto assets that they will have. And I don't know, I think it's open to interpretation of whether they actually hold them or whether they just sell them off for Bitcoin if they ever get in forfeiture. I mean, if we go back to Bitcoin 2024, when Trump announced these kind of things, he never said anything about a reserve then either. He just said that they won't sell them. Everyone else in crypto Twitter created this concept of the Bitcoin reserve, and it just was a good title, so it kind of stuck and went all the way up the chain to Trump. But if he'd signed that executive order on day one when he got in, we would have all been cheering. Like, that would have been huge for us. But no, he didn't sign that then. He created a working group, and then everyone's kind of got a little bit more excited. You've got that Senator Lumens, Senator Cynthia Lumens, she's been tweeting about wanting to sell gold for Bitcoin. And so everyone's kind of latched onto that. Oh, the government's going to be selling their gold to buy Bitcoin. They're going to be buying up billions and billions of dollars of it. And it's just got out of hand when the reality was that Trump actually just promised not to sell the Bitcoin that they held. And so everyone got worked up, wanting more, and we didn't have that. And so that, I think, was set the stage for us to fail. I mean, we thought he was going to kick this can down the road. We thought this announcement was going to come at the end of the working group cycle, like that 90 days from that original executive order, which was a few days after he got elected, saying that he's creating a working group to look at this stuff. We thought at the end of that period, there'd be the announcement of Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. No, he's front-run that a bit. He said, we're just going to not sell the Bitcoin. He did make announcements saying, they going to look at ways to obtain more Bitcoin without any cost to the taxpayer. He really emphasized without any cost to the taxpayer. And to me, that's just government, gaslighting, really. He's like going, we could buy more, which gets everyone excited, but the people who don't really care about crypto, but we're not going to spend your money on it. So he's gaslighting both people, I feel. I don't think there's much incentivization for them to do that. This, concept of them selling gold for Bitcoin just sounds dumb. The concept of selling any other assets that they might have for Bitcoin just sounds kind of dumb. If you want to buy an appreciating asset, sell a depreciating asset, which is the US dollar. If they were going to, get more, they'd use the US dollar. That makes the most sense to me. So all those kind of things have just combined to be like, well, everyone got a little bit carried away. The smart thing for the president to do was keep his promise and not sell the Bitcoin. That was his promise. Everyone got a little bit carried away, and the markets have really crashed during a time when just in general macro conditions are bad.
Yeah, for sure. I think I do share that sentiment. If on day one he said the stockpile and all that, I think that's even, again, before all the tariffs and all that, like we would have gone up likely to, I reckon, about 120,000 US dollars.
Yep.
But yeah, I think now it's come. And again, the timing just threw everyone off. And that tweet still will go down as a mystery about what he was even going on about adding Solana, XRP, and Cardano. So they actually sold off particularly, more than other altcoins because of that disappointment of them not being included. So that was, a really big day on Friday. And again, that point you did raise about sort of leaving it open-ended and giving some hope to investors about, what does this actually mean in terms of accumulating Bitcoin. I think I do agree with you. I think there's that skeptical side of it where he's even just trying to appease, donors really, and the market in general, just be like, oh, hey, we'll look into it someday. It's, as you said, political speak in many ways for they might get to it in the future, but not a priority. I think optimistic side is, hey, this has all come about pretty quickly, and they really do need to look into ways to accumulate via like a budget neutral sort of strategy. And hey, maybe that's something that the likes of Scott Besson and Howard Lutnick and whatnot, will do. Maybe there generally is a way for them to do that, but I guess time will tell. I think the only thing that's giving me somewhat some hope in a sense is, that I did like seeing the fact that, the most powerful people in Trump's cabinet were at that summit in terms of, Howard Lutnick, the commerce head of Secretary of Commerce, and we saw Treasury Secretary as well sitting next to Trump, rather than it's some delegated person from the Treasury or something, which would have been a really bad signal that, hey, they actually don't care about this step about maybe accumulating some more Bitcoin there. So, but again, I think one thing that's consistent, Simon, with a lot of what we're talking about, none of this is even anything to get excited about in the short term, which I think is quite obvious right now for crypto investors. And I think that's what's contributing to the sell-off. The short-term catalyst for something like crypto or Bitcoin, which is specific to this crypto market. And that's, again, I want to emphasize any internal catalysts. So nothing about macro conditions flipping better. We really haven't had a lack of a catalyst for quite some time. It really just goes back to about winter, about, I want to say May, June, July last year, when it still wasn't really looking that likely that Trump was going to win. And before the whole Bitcoin conference thing happened, that was another time I remember where we really lacked a short-term catalyst. And that explains why prices were so choppy for crypto. But we've had the Bitcoin ETF to look forward to, going back about 18 months now. And then we all got excited about the halving, and Bitcoin ETF adoption was still something in the short term, to get excited about. And then we were all getting excited about Trump delivering and the potential of Trump to support the crypto market. But yeah, here in March 2025, I think this is one of the first times in quite some time where I'm struggling to think of a very short term internal catalyst for crypto.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, let's review what Trump actually promised people in crypto. He promised to fire Gary Gensler. He didn't get to. Gensler resigned before he got that opportunity. But he did that. He promised to stop the war on crypto. And I think that's kind of happened where we've seen the SEC drop so many cases against all these crypto industries. So I think that has kind of gone the choke point 2.0 kind of theory. I think he has stopped that. His third one was to set up a strategic reserve, even though he didn't use those words. But to set up a strategic reserve, he's done that now. That's ticked. And the last thing is make the US the crypto capital of the world. That was kind of his rhetoric about crypto in general. And, we've talked about that summit, but really all we actually talked about was the tweet before an executive order before the summit about the Bitcoin reserve. We haven't talked about the summit at all. And that was because that went behind closed doors. Trump came out and gave a little speech in front of everyone, and then it went behind closed doors, and they talked about crypto. And what did they talk about? Well, I reckon they talked about that number 4 point, how they make the US the crypto capital of the world, which to me is regulation. To me, that is how do they regulate this industry to make sure that the US is on top of it. And I think that's what was being talked about. I think that's now what Trump's crypto working group is building towards, is regulation. And still my biggest theory around this is stablecoin regulation. The US is the world reserve currency, as everyone knows. Everyone using a stablecoin is predominantly using a US-based stablecoin. I think that, to me, is the biggest thing that the US government should be interested in blockchain technology, is how do they regulate that to make sure that the US dollar is the stable currency of choice and remains that. And that's basically, green lighting things like USDC in some way, USDT somehow bringing that on board within their regulation sphere, working with those guys to make sure that they tick these regulation boxes. I think that's the biggest thing that the US government should be interested in crypto. And I think that's what that Crypto Summit was predominantly about, is how do they make regulations available for stablecoins and businesses to thrive in crypto.
Yeah, well said there. And I think just to add, yeah, some context to what I just said before as well. Like, this is all fantastic news for crypto, but I think what I was trying to emphasize is this is not short term. And I should say, like, by short term, for me, I classify that as, 1 or 2 months, something that's really is to get excited about. I think in 2025, all signs are pointing towards really very fantastic outcomes for crypto adoption, and even the capacity for the market cap to go up significantly. But I can't see that happening in the next 1 to 2 months. I think things that came out of that summit were very promising from what the reports are in terms of, hey, getting the conversation going. There's even some other SEC series of meetings, the first of which is actually, I think, March 19th, which will be publicly available to the public to watch. It's also trending in, achieving that fourth goal of crypto, the capital crypto being the US in many ways, and, the likes of certain banks this year. If all looks like it's trending in the right direction, you'll have the likes of BNY Mellon and other banks even supporting, custody services for crypto. Again, that is a very, very big catalyst that I'm expecting to still see in 2025, but just not anytime soon. So yeah, that's just some clarification there.
Yeah, and I think, we should actually, we've been kind of putting a lot of fear to a degree in what we've been talking about.
Yes.
But the US has just said that Bitcoin is an asset that you shouldn't sell. It's that's a pretty big statement in and of itself. But obviously, prices going down, no one cares about that. But this is a huge thing that the US government is saying, we will hold on to Bitcoin. We're not going to sell. They're going to be a massive sinkhole for Bitcoin. So if they ever seize any more, they're not going to sell it. If they do acquire some of it in some way, they're not going to sell it. That in and of itself is a huge thing, and something that, crypto was, even couldn't even dream of a few years ago. So this is big. It is huge. Prices are down because of a whole bunch of factors, but it really sets up the future for, strong growth in cryptocurrency.
Yeah, well put there. I personally not selling and haven't sold really any of my crypto. I wish I did, obviously, short term wise, a month ago or so. But I am still looking to accumulate altcoins once we start to see a correction. Why? Because I do think prices will be much higher later this year. But it's a good point of emphasis there. I think altcoin wise, amid this bloodbath, there hasn't really been much market sensitive news or anything too significant. The only one I'll give a shout out to is Aave, which seems to be really pushing forward with their tokenomics sort of revamp, and a main feature of that being adding in this buyback mechanism, where the Aave treasury will be, well, for the sake of this proposal, assuming it passes, the Aave DAO will be buying back $1 million worth of Aave every week from secondary markets, and that'll be a 6-month trial. So I know they proposed this buyback, I think it was last July or August, and they've gone through a process of feedback with the community, a few iterations, and it looks like this is about to be going through to a vote. So we've seen this trend of more buybacks, coming through ever since Trump was voted in. I think it can be viewed as bullish or bearish. I think for something like Aave, which has a very capped, at least at the moment, a very capped sort of revenue, it can in a way sort of place a ceiling on how parabolic in a way Aave's price can grow. But I suppose it's also a sign of the industry and the market maturing now that we have some more, if this is to continue, some more predictive sort of, I suppose, modeling that can be done on how much they repurchase. But certainly a trend that we've noticed in these governance tokens, all of a sudden getting some utility throughout 2025 looks to be a sure thing.
I think the interesting thing about buybacks is that, most retail don't really understand what that is, because I think people understand yield a bit better. But because regulations are so uncertain about these things, they can't give yield out to people because they can get in trouble with regulations. But buying back the token is kind of the current crypto version of a yield. They're going to make your token price go up by buying back some of it and burning it. Those tokens go out of circulation and therefore price goes up. And so that's the current workaround that we have in crypto. Whereas I think once again, this is what the working group's probably trying to build towards, is how do we change it from buyback, which retail don't understand, and probably even, a lot of institutional investors don't fully understand how a buyback works.
Mm,
Maybe they do, because you can buy back stocks in many ways, but like, people just want yield.
mm,
They want to know that they get a yield from these tokens. And so imagine how different this conversation would be if they said, oh, are they giving out $1 million worth of their profit as yield to token holders?
mm.
Like that,
Yeah.
that's what they're doing in a way, but it's a completely different mind of how it works. And, that's hopefully where regulation comes into place, where someone like Aave don't have to beat around the bush. They can just say, hey, you get a yield if you buy this token.
Yeah, that's it. In terms of things we're looking forward to this week, in particular, the next macro date will be March the 12th. That is when the February's inflation data, or the CPI data, will be released. And yeah, we've seen trends all showing that inflation should be coming down, throughout this year. Obviously, tariffs are have an inflationary effect, but even the likes of Trueflation I saw earlier or over the weekend has actually dropped below 2%. It's now about 1.8% or so. So again, not exactly CPI, but is all indicating that price pressure, should be declining, which is great news, and really gives the Federal Reserve in the US or other central banks, if that's consistently happening in other economies, inflation going down, then we should have more propensity for these banks to cut rates, which is what crypto in particular is cheering on for. So we'll see a central bank decision actually in the US. Their next meeting is, March 18th and 19th. So we'll get March 19th there. We'll get an announcement and next policy update from Jerome Powell. And something to note is also that there won't be a meeting in April. So this will actually be a very every meeting feels important, but I feel like this one will be particularly important from the Fed here, given, they won't have until May the 7th for their next update to the market. So again, very important one there to look out for.
Do you know why that is? I didn't know that. Why don't
No, they don't actually have one every month. I think they have about 9 meetings every year. So this is just one of them.
That to me, that's a huge thing. I don't reckon there'll be any change of policy in March 19. I think it's still too soon for there to be any clear change in policy. So
yeah,
May could be very interesting. That to me is, hey, when are you expecting a turnaround? My hot take right now is that maybe we might be waiting until May 7th to see some kind of big policy changes. So we've said weeks and months, and that to me is a fair indicator of where we might be waiting and sitting in.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if we're waiting for April 2nd with all these things like tariffs, things like that. I think, a few weeks off at the least. I think multiple months will go by before we start getting some momentum. So in terms of just finishing off here, I think we like to finish off. It's related to what we've been saying, but I really want to bring this home with our overrated or underrated. Simon, what do you think people are either overrating or underrating this week?
Well, I think maybe they're underappreciating the fact that, crypto prices are not necessarily just driven by crypto news. They're driven by some global macro events. And so now that we've got no real big crypto news, there's no Bitcoin reserve coming up, everyone's going to go back to, actually, it's the global macro issues that actually drive it, global liquidity, all those kind of things. It's central bank, printing money, all these quantitative easing things are going to come back into play. And the answer is it's probably what it always was as well. Like, these other news items can move markets, but hey, crypto is big enough to be part of the whole global macro environment. And we're going to start remembering that again now.
Yeah, well said. I've got overrated as automatically buying the dip. I think it's a mentality in stocks as well as crypto that is just peddled, everyone encouraging everyone else to buy the dip automatically. I think I've at least, while I've regretted not selling it in recent months, really, I've at least been happy with holding off, not automatically, buying in. And again, I think too many investors out there just automatically think if they see prices dip 5 to 15% or something in altcoins, that they should automatically just keep buying the dip because that's what everyone says. I would just encourage people to just, when you see a crash in the market, try your best, depending on how much time you've got, but try your best to understand just, what are the reasons for this sell-off? Was it just a liquidation, cascading effect? Nothing really has changed fundamentally, or is something fundamentally changing, which in my opinion was, quite clear that it was the latter in this case. When prices started to fall with all the tariff news and uncertainty just increasing, it seemed like this was going to continue and we were going to keep bleeding for a few weeks. Hard to determine how much more will go down, but yeah, I would just caution people from automatically thinking every dip has to be brought into. So yeah, we'll keep those lessons coming, and yeah, crypto always teaching us lessons given how volatile it is, but that's why we're here, and it's why we're here to help guide you through. So if you are looking for more market insights, do see our weekly Shift newsletter. That's free market insights straight to your inbox every Friday. So subscribe to that at collectiveshift.io/newsletter. That's collectiveshift.io/newsletter.